Zuzy, welcome to Worldbuilding Secrets.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So happy you're here. Let's get to it. Let's just get to it.
Okay, let's jump in.
Let's jump in. What's your favorite book or short story or even a piece of writing of yours?
Good question. It falls into different categories. Like a lot of writers, you ask a simple question and we'll come up with a complex answer. Favorite, I recently co-wrote with Brent, our narrative director, a pilot for House of the Dead. And that was a fun challenge, being able to sort of jump into a world that had some interesting lore, but a lot of room to create your own and sort of step in there and expand there. But, there's some older stuff that I've done. Everyone remembers their first, and the first episode of TV I wrote was for this show based on the movie The Crow. And that was also another one where you step into lore and then try to expand it. And that was a lot of fun. But there's always this one little moment. I helped Brent with a script for what was largely a mediocre show called Mercy Point. And it had a short run. And
was that the one on MTV?
I can't remember where it aired. It was basically it was ER set in space. So you had like this space hospital, and it was, again, it had some potential that ultimately wasn't fully realized. But this was back when my dad was alive, and I didn't tell him, so that when an episode unfolded and there was a line in there that I thought would get him, and he laughed, not knowing that I had written it. Because if I had written it, he would have withheld a little bit, and so that kind of made the early part of my career making my dad laugh. But anyway.
Definitely relatable. Has transmedia and world building projects, have they always been something that you've been primarily involved with, or have you started with other ones as well? Or like, how did you even get into writing in the first place?
Yeah, like a lot of people, when I was coming up in the 90s and early aughts, you're focusing on TV and film. And, video games are this, neighboring thing, which they're interesting and fascinating. But, you weren't bridging those two worlds as much. And sort of this idea of transmedia and IP showing up in all of these different areas, and sort of transmedia / major world building, is something that sort of started then and really ramped up. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up working with Brent so much. That idea of true world building. So you create this framework from which you can tell all different kinds of stories. It doesn't get much more, potent as a writer. It's like, we're not asking you just to write a script. We're asking you to create a world, or in the case of the Unioverse, create an entire universe.
Yeah, so much bigger than that.
Yeah. And so, world building in general, I mean, it's at the heart of, anyone who is, writing scripts for TV or film. But the intentionality of designing, again, a framework for something like the Unioverse, where it's like, it's going to be community owned. It's like, that framework better be really good, really solid, because that's what the foundation you're going to build everything on.
Definitely. Do you have an author or a writer that has shaped or inspired the way that you write, whether it's in world building or not?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a lit geek in that I have a master's in English lit. Not that that matters too much, but I love books. It's where I started, and then I sort of built from there, and then fell in love with writing for film and television, and then built from there. But you go back and look, and sci-fi writers like Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke were people that just blew me away. I actually just recently shared, there's a short story for anyone who's listening or watching, called The Star by Arthur C. Clarke. I highly recommend it. It's only 4 pages long. It'll take you 15 minutes and it'll blow your mind.
Definitely.
And it's that kind of thing where it's like, it doesn't have to be long to be potent, and it doesn't have to be as much as I love world building, you can do a lot of world building in just a few pages,
Right.
and set up expectations and then defy them. And so those guys inspired me. John le Carré, who wrote spy novels, he never wrote a boring sentence in his life, and I've always aspired to try to do that as well. And John Irving, if you've never read him, the book A Prayer for Owen Meany probably has the single best first sentence in a novel ever.
Really?
So if you only read the first page,
Ooh.
then yeah. So check it out.
I'm going to need to get a list from you, and then we'll share it with the community. Well, speaking of, I guess, challenges and kind of, the things that you need to really, I guess, work on and progress to become a world builder like you, how did you come across challenges, and how did you really face them to develop your writing skill set and become better with time?
What's interesting about this is that you really only learn the pitfalls by, you just learn by doing. And there was a project that Brent and I worked on, I want to say maybe 10 years ago now, called Age of Atlantis. So set in Atlantis, but a little more grounded than you might think for something set in Atlantis. And it was a major undertaking world building wise, because we were trying to envision an ancient world that was also a little bit futuristic, that ultimately gets wiped out as Atlantis does. But at the heart of it, or one major piece of it, was that we had to work out a magic system, which anyone who works in sci-fi and fantasy will tell you is a real challenge, where it's like, okay, people in this world can use magic. Okay, what is it grounded in? What are the extents of it? How powerful is it? What are the problems with it? Are there, whatever the rules are, how can they be broken or bent? Right. We spent a lot of time on that. That was my baby for a while. And, it broke my heart. Like a lot of projects, they go into turnaround, but I still think about that magic system and that world that we built. And again, very challenging because, side by side, you're developing this magic system, but you're also developing all of your characters. We had sort of a multi-generational thing, and a little bit sort of Game of Thrones-y, in that you had a lot of people vying for power in this feudal but also futuristic society. And so again, we're creating everything from the ground floor, and facing all of those challenges and trying to keep them balanced. Learned a lot from that one, so that now when I step into new worlds, I borrow on that experience all the time.
I mean, that sounds like even though I'm sure it's a crazy challenge, I mean, I can only imagine, for example, like George R. R. Martin trying to create Valyrian. How do you, I mean, I see those clips on YouTube all the time of like Matt Smith, who plays Damon, trying to like remember. And he's like, it took so long for me to really start to understand, because it's quite literally language. It's not like I'm just given sentences to read. Yep. And, obviously they have meaning. It's an actual language. There's people that they can learn it if they feel like it.
Yeah. And that's a tradition in world building, where Tolkien did it. He created the Elvish language. I think there's a Dwarvish language. And you have Klingon in Star Trek. Like, it's a legit language. Like, you could study it and you could speak it at a family get together if you wished to.
Awesome.
And it is. And that's one of the things when you mentioned George R. R. Martin. He is just such a brilliant world builder. And I'd like to sit down with him and, tell him, finish your books, man. But you just look at the early books there, and his ability, to me, it's always these little details where, and I'm sure we'll get into this later on, but, the idea, like, there are different areas when you're world building that you need to address. one of those things is, how do you handle death and dying? Because it's a constant. And he created the Silent Sisters, which we've seen in the latest show, but obviously we saw it quite a bit in Game of Thrones. But like, there's a tradition around it. If you read the books, there's, sections where it talks about, how they go about what they're doing, how one might end up being a Silent Sister. And it is fascinating and just makes the world feel real. Like, if you've addressed all of that, and George R. R. Martin talks about himself as being a cultivator when he writes and rewrites and goes back in. And because once you start laying down the foundation, you start realizing, okay, there's pieces of this I haven't thought about yet. And it might make me rethink some other things that I did. So
definitely. Yeah. If you had to sit down, if you had the opportunity to sit down with any world builder in the entire world, alive or deceased, who would it be? And what would you ask them?
Oh, goodness.
This one's a little on the spot, so take your time.
Yeah, no, well, you've heard the stories too. I loved the podcast you did with Brent, and he periodically, he just uncorks well, when I was talking to George, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'd like to sit down and talk with Mr. Lucas. That's who George is to me. And just, just pick his brain. Like, Brent talked about the couple of notebooks. I'd love to flip through those notebooks and be able to ask some questions. And, maybe even be able to ask some hard questions. Like, when you were thinking of the prequels, did it have the same magic feeling to you as it was when you were first creating and stepping into this world? Because now you're refining and looking at backstory and digging into character motivations and whatnot. Picking his brain would be fascinating, especially since he's continued with it. That, whenever you add something else, whether it's something like Rebels or Clone Wars or the current shows, like, you have to find how they fit in, and you are both shackled by, but also guided by all the rules that you've put in place, all the world building you've done in the past. And just talking to him about the hard choices he's had to make, the things that he wanted to add, but it just didn't fit. And has he ever been tempted to create another universe, or is it good enough to be the god of one? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm really curious, as a writer, when you, for example, when you and Brent are currently writing for the Unioverse, or when George R. R. Martin was writing his books, do you go into that knowing that, or hoping that one day it'll become a show, a movie, something visual, something that people, if you think about it, I'm sure more people have watched it than they have read the book. And I guess it's maybe, it's a completely different way of portraying your story as well, right? It's not the same. Like, the books of Game of Thrones are completely, in my opinion, very different from the shows. So I'm wondering how you think about that when you go about writing.
Yeah, like a lot of screenwriters, one of the reasons why I went down that path was, one, I think about things visually. But two, that's where the audience is. To me, stories are not fully told, or not making the most of what they are, without having an audience, and hopefully a big one, because it's a shared communal experience. The power of sitting down and writing a story is wonderful, but it's meant to be shared. Until it's shared, all it is ink on a page, or dots on a screen. And but what's interesting over the years, having learned and having done a lot of work with adapting existing material from books or video games or into movies and television, that some bad books can make great television, and some great books can make horrible television. They're not necessarily adaptable equally. Like, if it's visual, and page turners really work well when you talk about when you talk about writing a screenplay or seeing a movie, because you want that forward momentum. Right. Where if you were to try to adapt like a TV show into a book, like if you were to take a show, one that I'm fond of, that's a little old now, but 24, the plot holes in that show are massive. But you forgive it in television because it has this forward momentum. But if you had time to sit down and read and think about it, you might question it a bit more. So again, not everything works in not everything works in every medium. True. But you know, certainly when sitting down and trying to think things through, as you know, like we're writing these short story installments for Malcolm Orion, and we are simultaneously trying to think in literary terms because it's just words on a page, but there are some visuals to go with it. It's some sort of, the end result is a bit, you know, like a graphic novel, but it's going to be in the anthology. But we're still thinking in terms of, it's going to be a video game. It's going to be, you know, it's a visual medium. It's going to be, you know, it could be TV. It could be film. Because in the end, the Unioverse is a very big, vast, and very visual place. And so we're always thinking in those terms.
Definitely. Definitely. Speaking of the Unioverse, when you were approached to write for it, what got you the most excited about it, or maybe most like intrigued? Where, you know, was it just the idea that you could write for something so incredible, or was it the people that you could work with, or what was that for you?
Because I've worked with Brent for so long, you know, when he's involved in something, I know it's going to be good. And then when he told me some of the other people who were going to be involved, it's like, okay, this is legit. This is going to be, you know, got some real powerhouses behind this thing, and you know, that gets some momentum. And I was initially brought on board to sort of help build out this the wiki, which so it's sort of foundational stuff, keeping track of it, making sure the pieces all fit, helping the writers who are writing in the anthology, helping them have a resource that they can go and look at and to answer some questions. But for me to know the wiki inside and out and be sort of the lore keeper and answer any questions that people might have. But, you know, even in the earliest of days, when I read through what they already had, it's like, okay, this is going to be, you could feel the potential. And it's like, okay, there's going to be a lot to do here. And so much rooms to explore. Key rules were in place, but there was so much more foundational work to be done. And I knew that I wanted to help with that. You couldn't, I mean, when you see what was there, it's like, why wouldn't I want to build this out and play a role in it? Like, who doesn't want to join the next Star Wars and be like, okay, I'm going to invent Wookiees today? Like, you know, because like Brent and I, we kicked around like, okay, we need to start coming up with some planets and some races. And it's just like, oh my gosh, we're literally just, you know, running around, you know, forming star systems and you know, how much fun is that? Like, okay, you don't have to pay me. I'll just sit over here and do it.
What is your favorite part of writing? Is that probably like naming, being able to actually visualize it all, or is it the protagonists, the antagonists?
It's a good question. It's funny. I think it was Gloria Steinem. I'm not sure, but there's a quote I think attributed to her saying, "I don't enjoy writing. I enjoy having written." The act of writing is, you know, it's hard, you know, getting into it, and you get frustrated. You're trying to get the words to line up the way you want to. Yeah. But I think any writer will tell you that the honeymoon phase, when you're first kicking around an idea, but when you're world building, that happens all the time. Where it's like, okay, we're going to work on this part of the story, and it's like, okay, I'm going to wrestle with some words and, you know, write 2,000 words on this. But then, okay, I'm going to hop on the phone now and, you know, or hop on Zoom and have a call about, you know, foundational stuff like, you know, some of the, like a progenitor ship. I think I can reference that now. Like, how do they work? And what can we do with that? And just the other day, Brent and I were just talking like, okay, somebody would try to mess with a progenitor ship. If you have a spacefaring race, what would they do? How would they do it? And then taking notes on that, where it's like, okay, we're not going to write that story yet, but we're going to put that into a file where it's like, that's a story we have to visit now. And you get to play around with that. And that's always the most fun and exciting part, where you're not fully committed to anything yet, but everything's a possibility.
Definitely. I remember one of the first meetings, our world building, art and story meetings. And I just remember, I think it was Stuart and I think you and Brent were debating on like, a hero was wearing specific kinds of boots, and you were debating on like how one of you didn't like the boots, someone else hated the boots, someone else loved the boots. And it was this whole debate on like, what kind of shoes should this person wear? Because what are the challenges that they're going to have to be doing? Is she going to have to jump, or is he going to have to fly or ride a ship constantly? Whatever it was, there was just so much thought process going into it. And in my head, I'm like, it's a shoe. It didn't, but I think that's a perfect example of just to show like how so much detail has to go in when writing something like the Unioverse, something like this, where every single thing matters, because it's all very much dependent on each other, very much dependent. And people that, from your end, that are there to write that story and give, especially when it comes to a hero or a progenitor or something, of great value in the Unioverse, then every little thing has to matter. Otherwise, it just won't connect, it won't work, and it won't last long term, which is something that Brent and I were talking about, is making a universe building a universe that can survive for a very long time. That's all, I could be talking to my kids about in 20 years.
And that's what's interesting. Yeah. I mean, part of my role has been, and it always has been when I do these things, like as much as I enjoy being creative, I also bring this logic piece to it. And I've been joking with Josh, who oversees the anthology and is a very good writer himself. And, people are pitching us ideas for stories for the anthology. And I find myself being like the dour killjoy, where I'm like, well, that doesn't quite work within the framework and rules that we're doing, or that are evolving and that we're putting them in place. And it's like that's what writers do. We push against the boundaries to find out what holds up and what doesn't. And it's a very useful process. But this is the work you have to do. And you have to stick to your guns and say yes or no to things, so that it can hold up long term. Because if you start breaking your rules right out of the gate, your community, your fans don't know what to trust anymore. It's like, you said it was this thing, and then you pivoted and it's something else. And to some degree, the way we're handling the Unioverse, we'll get away with some of that because it's a community built thing. And if enough people think it should be something different, so be it. But here in the early going, when we're talking about the creators and what they invented and how it operates, you can push against the boundaries of it, but I have to push back, because it's like, no, we need the foundation to be what it's going to be. So
can you think of any other projects that you've worked on, or people that you worked with, where you've had to be that almost logical, you've had to push for that, that logic, or something that you pretend you were like, this is not going to work, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Outside of Brent, the highest profile person I've done that with, and it just makes me mildly uncomfortable even thinking about it right now. I worked with Stan Lee for a while.
Oh my God.
And Stan is great, don't get me wrong. But he, every now and again would just, Stan would be Stan and be like, we're going to do this and that and this. And like, he'd be really animated and talking about it. And, and it's like, Stan, that doesn't quite work with what we're trying to do, and let me walk you through what we're doing here in the script and how it'll ripple effect into the scripts we have up ahead. And you could see no one wants to do that with Stan because
It's Stan.
It's Stan. A, he has that power and cachet. B, he's very good at what he does. C, you could see him deflate. Like he was really excited about that idea, and then you would see like the excited 12-year-old boy in him be like, "Oh, but that's what I wanted to do." And it's like, I'll do my best to give you that, Stan, but we got to have it fit the overall world of the story that we're building.
Really tough job.
Yeah. But somebody's got to do it, and eventually they count on you to do it. Even if they get frustrated with you, it's like the end result is, okay, we have something strong that'll hold up.
Right. Definitely. What kind of unique qualities do you think the Unioverse has to offer in comparison to other world building projects that are maybe even in the gaming space currently, or just other world building projects, and it's not necessarily having to do with gaming?
Well, two things to say about that. One, I mean, it goes without saying, but we're incredibly excited to, the fans and the community are going to play such a role here in helping us shape not just a world, but a universe. And we're not only, some people might see that as like you're allowing the fans to do this. No, we're embracing it and we're leaning into it, where it's like, why wouldn't you want your audience to tell you what they want, right? And to be fair, though, it's hard to let go as a writer.
It's a reason why there's not many projects out there that have done that. That's the reason. That is the main reason why. Yeah,
well, and it is. We were talking before. Like, I've got 2 kids, and you raise kids. We spend all this time, and then we release them into the world, and they become what they become. And that really is the nature of any project, any writing project, any world building project, that to some degree, whether you do it with intentionality as we are with the Unioverse, or you just create like the world of the Matrix and you put it out into the world, fans are going to have their opinions. They're going to say stuff, and they're going to pull it in directions. And it becomes something that maybe you never intended it to be, but that's just how it works. Once you bring the world or the universe into being, you don't have complete say anymore. And that's both exciting and exciting, but also terrifying because you're letting go, right?
Definitely.
That control piece. But, but then underneath it all, like we're spending all this time trying to get it ready to release to the world. So that foundation is there. And there's just so much cool stuff in the Unioverse about, I could go on at length, and this would be the English lit person in me, but science fiction is a metaphor for life. We seek meaning, we seek to understand existence, why everything is here, and the universe has that. There are some mysteries there that'll never be explained. It only has the meaning that we give it, but it's not just us. It's going to be the community. And, it's very exciting to share those possibilities, and even just the tiniest little pieces we've already gotten from the community where they've just seen some art and then they've written some poetry.
Incredible.
Incredible.
So good.
Someone puts out an image and basically the invitation is there, like, okay, what do you think this is? What do you think's going on? And then you read the 50 responses and you're like, oh boy. Well, like 3 of those might be better than what I thought of. And 2 of them got really close. So I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I've always been impressed with sci-fi and fantasy audiences. They keep you on your toes because they have expectations, and
they do indeed.
Hopefully, we can live up to them. Yeah.
I think that's what makes this community so special, is because it's passionate. It's not just about, trying to sell something or product, a company. It's not. It's a story that you not only get to love and enjoy and have an opinion about, you get to be a part of it. And I think that that's, that's really unique and hopefully will be groundbreaking.
Yeah.
What do you think, what role does storytelling play in the Unioverse?
It's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Unsurprisingly, we keep our eyes on other projects in this space. Like we're not the only ones out there, building a world and a universe and embracing community. But people are coming at it from different directions. And I completely understand this desire, the digital autonomous organization, that the idea that you hand over control to your community, and the philosophy of letting players create their own lore and tell their own stories. I believe in all of that. But I do believe you need a spine. You need that foundation. That Star Wars is, a lot of the trappings of it are on the surface. Okay, lots of sci-fi has planets. Lots of sci-fi has ships flying around those planets. But you need a story underlying that. You need the battle of good and evil. And, this concept that has been around in video games forever, but certainly is more and more in this space, what we're doing now in the stories we're telling, this idea of agency. Players want agency. Players want some say in what they're doing. And I'm a gamer. I'm a very bad one in the sense, like I don't stay alive for very long, but I love the stories of video games. And
what kind of games do you play?
All of the sort of open sandbox, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, Fallout, all of that kind of stuff. I'm in the middle of Assassin's Creed Valhalla right now, and the skill trees are totally lost on me. And that, like, I want the story, and I want to run around and kill things, and have I'll use the same 5 combinations for everything. But it's fun because, again, like, I get to choose where I go. I want to have that agency, but I also want to be told a really good story. And if philosophically speaking, if you just let everyone tell their own stories and everybody have their own lore, and all of that lore doesn't fit in with each other, eventually, that idea of agency, we want agency to a point, but we want it all to have meaning. We want there to be, I'm going to say something that it doesn't, I'm trying to figure out how to say it right. Like when you're working with kids, and you give them rules, they push against those rules, but they also count on them. In that it's like, okay, I might break a rule, but I know the rules are in place and they keep me safe. And it's the same thing in a universe, in world building. You create the rules and create this foundation. And I know I keep using that word, but it creates that sense of like, okay, I'm in the hands of people who are going to tell me a great story, and I can go off and explore different pieces of it. That we can work together to create a great story. But if everyone is just, running around the playground telling all of their different stories and there's no underlying framework, it's not all going to fit together.
No spine.
Yeah.
It needs that spine. I also think it's beautiful. I think it's really important that the way stories like that are shared are done in a way where, it's not overwhelming. It's inspiring, and it's very much, it's communal and somehow fun. So how have you and the team decided to share the Unioverse story, at least the beginning? And can you tell me what that story will be and how it's going to be shared?
Yeah, there's a lot of intentionality here, and a lot of great minds have been working together to figure out exactly what you're saying. How do we unfold this, including your mind as well? Like, marketing plays a role in this. Like, how do you show something to an audience? And the unfolding of the narrative. And so obviously I don't know when people are going to be listening to this, but today in chronological time, they're going to be dropping the first part of the Malcolm Orion story.
Correct.
And NFTs are going to be hitting. And so we've decided, okay, we're going to put out small pieces of the story so that you can get a sense for the world that we're in and get a sense for the foundation, sense for how the world works. And then it will expand from there, where we have some comics that are in the works to introduce our central heroes, introduce some major antagonistic forces, because every good world building exercise needs to have some antagonists kicking around, some people trying to stop your people from doing what they wish to do.
Definitely.
But also, sort of conveying in as compelling a way as we can, how did we get here? Sort of, because there's going to be a time frame in which most of our story is being told, but a lot had to happen to get us to that point. And to understand the world that we're in now, I mean, just like you could compare it to today, like to understand where we are in 2022, go back 50 years and work your way up to today, and you have a better understanding of it. So we're trying to put that stuff out there, but in a way where, it's like one movie trailer after another. It's like, here's another little piece, here's another little piece. And again, it'll expand from there, and there'll be certain big explosions when like the comics hit, when the anthology hits, where we've got, 15, 20 pieces between poetry and short stories that are going to really expand the universe in a big way all at once. But using all the stuff that we've put into place up till then. So if you jump into the anthology, if you have been reading and looking at everything we've put out, you'll understand it all, how it's all working, and can go into that experience. Because everyone's gone through that experience with a new sci-fi novel or a new, like the first book in a series, and your head's spinning with all of the world building aspects of it. Yeah. And so it's like, you need to establish all of that, and we're going to be doing that over time. So when those big things hit, you have a working knowledge.
Yeah. So the main character of these first stories that are going to be coming out is called Malcolm Orion. Can you tell me a little bit about Malcolm and what role he plays in the Unioverse story?
It's funny. This is where we step into that territory of what do we tell and when do we tell it? And my sarcastic response, what I can tell you about Malcolm Orion is that his name is Malcolm. And I could stop right there, but I won't. The idea... Yes, exactly. But he is the... and I think Brent may have touched on this in his podcast. He's the first human to discover the Masso transportation system. It's the big idea at the center of the universe. And when that happens, it's 230 years in the future. And it follows Malcolm Orion on this amazing journey of discovery that, I think Brent touched on the fact that, they discover something on Mars, which ultimately ends up leading to him ending up on the hub, and things unfold from there. It's a story that's going to be told in 6 parts, and at least the first part of Malcolm Orion's journey will be presented in those 6 parts. We're currently, while we have all of the broad brushstrokes in place all the way through those 6 parts, we're refining and tinkering because, again, it's an organic universe that's still growing. I can't stress it enough for anyone who's listening or watching, like, jump in this early. The opportunities are there to really shape this thing. Because again, we're still, we're not even just tinkering. There are things that we changed over the last month where it's like, okay, this is a big change, but it's needed. It's called for.
Definitely.
And it's exciting. But so when it comes to these stories, Brent and I map them out. We bounce ideas back and forth, draft it out. We iterate it to get it to where we want it to be. And it's not until you step into a world where it's like, okay, now that I'm living and breathing in this space, what is it really like? So as Brent talked about, a consciousness jumps from one place to another. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What happens when you get there?
Yeah.
And how do you feel after that journey? And we had some ideas, but it wasn't until we literally pushed Malcolm Orion through that journey. It's like, oh, that's what it looks like. That's what he's thinking and feeling. That's
incredible.
Yeah. And so it's really this journey of discovery every single time we step into pieces like that.
Yeah.
And when these 6 pieces are done, again, they'll be released periodically for the community to read. And then it'll all be put together to be the lead story or one of the stories in our anthology, along with some bonus content. So people who have already read the story, there's a reason to dive back in because we've got some ideas for some other stuff that doesn't necessarily fit the narrative, or add enough forward momentum to the narrative, or it gives a little too much away, and we want to preserve that and have that in the anthology.
Because not only did you guys have to basically reformat the story to fit these 6 pages, but also to work with the collectibles.
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about the collectibles and how that was like?
Yeah, it was. First of all, I have to say that Stuart and Ken are outstanding.
Our team members.
Yes, and regularly. I mean, it honestly is this give and take of okay, we weren't necessarily, that wasn't where we were going to go, but because that art is so darn compelling, that's where we're going to go now. That's what we're going to do with this.
Really?
Yeah, where it's okay, we've got the broad brushstrokes, but given how you made that look, okay, that's going to change, how we want to handle that. Or the section that we're working on the story now, a little bit of a teaser, there's a space that Malcolm is going through, and then Stuart dreamt up some art, and it's oh my gosh, this vast space filled with these structures is so mind-blowing. It's okay, we need to slow down and just give Malcolm Orion some time to take that in, because again, when you're inside the heart and mind of the character, he's not going to just walk by these spaces and ignore them and go wherever we were intending for him to go.
Yeah. He
needs to take it in and explore it a little bit. And so, that's sort of some of the give and take that we've had. And when it comes to the NFTs, some of it, this may sound unsexy, but it's okay, we're going to be programmatic about this. Okay, we're going to have 30 to 60, NFTs, and we're going to pair the story up. And what do we want to release when? What do we want people to see and know? What do they need to know and understand to be able to appreciate what Malcolm Orion is going through? And so it's okay, we want to match the pace of the NFTs with the pace of the story, and have them work really well together. And so again, there was a lot of, give and take and a lot of planning that went into that. But in the end, what you're going to end up seeing is, these NFT images, which paired with what we wrote, and some of them will already be in the actual document, but others paired with it, it becomes sort of this hybrid, graphic novel feel where it's oh, so this thing that I'm visualizing in the story, okay, that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. And so by the time you get to the end of the 6 sections and you've got all of these NFTs, you have not only a literary prose sense of what the world is like, you've got all these images to go with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most exciting. I think when a story like that does have this visual accompaniments to it, but also they're yours. They're the communities. You own them. They are not only images that are yours, they're free, and you can trade them and you can give them your own value. You are in control of these collectibles and in turn, almost the story, right? So I'm really curious to see what are some other ways that this story will be showcased for our community once they do see this visual representation to these collectibles and you own them, right? Like I think that's going to change the way people think a little bit, and maybe how invested they can be and how invested they want to be in the story. Where do you see the story going, like from our community? I know, we have some comics coming. We have some other exciting stuff coming that I'm not allowed to say. What's like something that you would, maybe would be surprised to see from the community or would be quite exciting, something that maybe could inspire them a little bit?
Yeah. One thing that I can say that we are doing, when we get to the end of Malcolm Orion's 6-part story, his personal story isn't done. It's not over. And we're continuing it in a journal format where he continues to have opportunities to explore and understand more of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Because, in our story, not only is Malcolm Orion first jumping 220 years from now, but the actual story takes place, or our current present day in the story is 500 years later. So a lot has happened. And we will be exploring that time space, but our fans, our community should want to, should is a dangerous word, but like I imagine they will be very tempted to jump into that time space. Like, how do you get from there to here? And it's very exciting, the possibilities. And so it's both that time period, but also we're between the anthology and other things on the way. It's about exploring the different areas of space. So you have your, in Star Trek, you have your foundational species, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have, you go a little further out and you have some planets that you've been to a couple of times. And then the furthest reaches, those crazy stories that take place on a planet you go and visit once. And we plan to explore all of those phases or reaches of our universe. And anyone who's interested in the universe and creating in the universe, that's to me one of the big questions to ask is like, do I want to do something truly foundational? If I were to jump into Star Trek, do I want to tackle a story that involves all the species that exist within the Federation? So playing around with Klingons and Vulcans and whatnot. Yep. Or do I want to just hop in the Enterprise and go to the furthest reaches of space and go to some crazy planet and explore what could possibly happen there? Yeah. Do you want, what kind of stories are you interested in telling? Do you go to an isolated planet with a fallen civilization on it? That is something that captivates me personally. Yeah. Or do you want to, explore what it means for, as you might imagine, I can't give away too much, but the idea that, okay, a civilization, how disruptive is it for a civilization to suddenly have that capacity to jump intergalactically and encounter all of these other species that are out there, and how does that affect you back at home? How do people on that world react to that possibility? Is there infighting? Is there the possibility for stories is endless, and you just have to ask yourself, what kind of story do I want to tell? And then join us and tell it.
It's incredible because I think we've spoken so much about how, what an amazing opportunity the community has to really be a part of the story and not only just be a part of it, but own it. But how difficult, like this is a challenge in itself. I think you guys have, you haven't made it easy, which is a good thing. But you really haven't made it easy because the story and the spine, right, going back to that, is so well thought out and so well designed that I think it'll be, very helpful for the community, but at the same time, quite challenging to figure out, where do I find myself in this as a writer, as a creator? For example, if you were a writer, part of the community or a creator, how would you go about it? How would you even, would you wait and be patient, or would you be somebody who takes notes all the times, or would you be somebody that, would love to just keep talking to the community and getting to know the people as much as possible? What would be your approach if you were to write as a community member?
I am like a lot of writers. I am collaborative at heart. And what I would want to do, I'd be jumping on to Discord, find probably a couple of writers and an artist and be like, okay, let's put our heads together. What do we know of this universe? And what would we want to do with that? Because I am a rule follower and a rule enforcer, as it turns out, with the Unioverse, I would want to have a solid understanding of like how things work in the Unioverse. And once we had that, use that, push at the boundaries and say, okay, how do these rules hold up? Is there a strange exception? Is there a case where rules could be bent but not broken? And team up with and kick things around. And it's and then have an artist work with them about like, okay, what might this species look like? Let's set a story on a water planet. What would a sentient race on that water planet look like? And how would, when they have an opportunity to go to the hub, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And what kind of potential conflicts might they have? So within the greater community, I would put together my own little community and say, all right, let's be a little pocket here and let's come up with something that is undeniably awesome and fits within the Unioverse framework.
I love that advice. I think that's so great. I mean, I really hope that people will take it in and use that and do that, because I think that's the best way to do it. That's the way we're doing it. I think that's the way they should do it. But everybody has their own ways of going about writing and creating, designing, whatever it is. I think this is a perfect time for me to ask you my final question, which I ask everybody is, so what is one, or you can mention multiple, what is your world building secret?
I figured that this was coming, and I've been thinking about it a lot because, we do things, but, do we stop and think through and articulate what it is we're doing? That's why Brent's whole universe worthy of devotion and all of those slides, like, okay, that was really articulate and thought through, and thinking about what he said and how he and I work together. One of the things that a lot of writers will tell you is that when you get into writing a script or a story, the characters start talking to you, that they take on a life of their own, that once you've imbued them with personality and attitude, background, viewpoints, you put them into a new situation, and you think you want the conversation to go one way, and the characters are like, hell no. No, I'm not going to, that's not what I would say here. This is what I'm going to say. And then the other character starts talking back because suddenly this character's showing attitude. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm transcribing a conversation. I'm not actually coming up with it. And this happens in world building too, just on a bigger level, where the world or the universe, once it starts coming into being, it starts telling you what will work and what won't. And, you've helped bring it into existence, but once it's in existence, it exists of itself. And there's room in there for all of these stories we want to tell. But it gets this momentum, and it tells you can feel when you're doing it right and when you're not doing it wrong, so much as like, okay, you need to adjust that. Like I referenced a little while ago about something that we changed. There's a resource within the Unioverse, which is very rare, and very important. And it was too rare. We had written ourselves into a corner where it's like, okay, we're creating too many problems, but more importantly, the universe is pushing back against us.
Yeah.
That the other things that we're trying to put into place don't work. So we have to tweak that, the accessibility of that resource so that it fits. And again, so the universe spoke, and we had to follow.
That's incredible.
And you have to be open to that. I mean, that's the big secret to me. I know Brent talked about humility, but to me, it's a variation on that. It's always about the story. It's always about the world. There will be times where you wanted to do something and you think you're right, but if the universe and the characters within it are telling you you're wrong, you gotta listen.
You gotta listen to them.
Yeah, your audience will pick up on it in a heartbeat. If you're trying to force something in a direction it shouldn't be going.
Yeah.
You have
and correct
to.
me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it might be so easy to almost in those situations where or you're hearing that and your characters are telling you that's not what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's it's instinctual, right? Is there ever a part of you that's like, well, I created you. Don't tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, because there's no way. How do you, that's probably how you have to somehow fight that, right?
Yeah, you end up in this negotiation with your character. It's an odd experience once you've had it, where it's just like, okay, but I really want you to do this, and here's why. Because later on, and sometimes a character will capitulate and allow you to go in that direction, but more often than not, it's like, I don't care where you think I'm going. This is what I'm going to say and do right now, and you're just going to have to live with it.
You have to listen.
And yeah, you have to listen. And it's not always easy because it's like, you're making me rethink things, and now I have more work to do. And, but again, if you're going to be true to the story and the world it inhabits, then you have to listen when it starts talking to you.
Definitely. Andy, thank you so much. This was such an incredible conversation. It was such a pleasure to have you on this podcast, and I really do hope that you can come back again and join me for another conversation.
Would love to do that when there's more stuff that we're allowed to talk about. But yeah, no, this was truly a pleasure. And I look forward to listening to your future guests.
Thank you so much.
Of course.